I'm so sorry, ma'am. I know you need this medicine, but it looks like it's not covered by your insurance.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had to deny that one.
Wait, who are you?
I'm your insurance company's pharmacy benefit manager. I get paid based on the price of a medicine, and I don't make as much money off this one.
No one should stand between you and your medicine. Visit phrma.org/middleman to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
Here are some of the things Claudine Sipili has heard folks say about homeless people in California. She's heard them say homeless people are too lazy to work. She's heard them say homeless people are just looking for money for drugs.
So it's a lot of mostly the same thing. It's like this, like a recording on loop, right?
Sometimes Claudine hears these kinds of sentiments from friends, sometimes from elected officials. That's when, if she can, she'll toss them a conversational bomb.
I get offended, I have a smile on my face, and then I let them know. I may not look like it, but I've been one of those people.
It was 15 years ago that Claudine ended up on the street. She actually lived in her car for a while. Then the repo man came. The main thing Claudine remembers from that time is how invisible she felt. She talks about walking down the sidewalk and getting the distinct impression she was one level lower than a human being. Things are really different now. Claudine is comfortable, but she thinks back on that invisible feeling a lot. She wants to shatter it. So a few months back, when she got this invitation to help researchers study California's homelessness crisis, she could not turn it down.
I jumped at the chance. I couldn't believe it. Like, I felt so honored to be asked, and I felt special.
Claudine's job was to shadow the team as they worked. She would listen in, let the researchers know when something they said didn't hit right. Claudine remembers training one woman and then following her out into the field.
And so I stood by as she talked to an unsheltered person out in the encampment. And I have to tell you, I stood there and I was like, oh, I'm making notes, like mental notes of things that I would pull the researcher aside after the conversation with the unhoused person so I could talk to her about it, right?
Like what?
Like the tone, like your tone, like bring the decibels of your voice down, like your tone sounds anxious. And if you sound anxious to me, you probably sound anxious to the person that you're interviewing, like a fear anxious, right? Like I'm uncomfortable talking to this person, to this homeless person right now, and I just want to rush through the piece that I have to say so I can be done talking to them.
The idea here was that if the researchers could make the people they were studying more comfortable opening up, they might get better data. And their report was just released, the California Statewide Study of People Experiencing Homelessness. It offers this uncommonly intimate portrait of what life on the streets really looks like. I can hear how proud you are of the work you did here. Do you ever think about just keeping the study with you so you can haul it out whenever you have one of those moments with someone who's like, these homeless people, they just want to stay on the streets?
Yes, and yes, Mary. I think it's easy to judge someone when you have never walked, any time at all in their shoes. It's easy to look at them and judge them. And the older I get, the more I get to a place where I'm seeking understanding, like this point of intersection where I'm connecting with another human and helping them see what I see,
Today on the show, Claudine wants you to know the face of homelessness is not who you think it is. And the study she just helped to build proves that. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity, much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
This episode is brought to you by Charles Schwab. Decisions made in Washington affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news right now. Hosted by Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, Washington Wise takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors. Tune in to learn about the policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes, and trade. Hear about inflation fears, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you're listening right now. To understand why the California statewide study of people experiencing homelessness is such a big deal, I wanted to speak with someone who knows this story deeply, which is how I ended up on the phone with Ethan Ward. Like Claudine, Ethan's been homeless himself. He lived in his car for a year, and he's writing a book about it. But he's also been a reporter covering the homelessness beat in Los Angeles. Ethan says this latest report, it was really focused on characterizing who the homeless are in California, which goes hand in hand with another study that came out just a few weeks back, the Greater Los Angeles Homeless Count. That research captured just how quickly the unhoused population is growing.
There was a 9% increase across LA County, and there was a 10% increase in the city of LA.
That seems big to me. Is it big?
Yes. I mean, anytime you have an increase of people that are experiencing homelessness anywhere, I think that's a big deal.
I know you noticed that there was a 16% increase from last year in the number of people living in their cars, which is something you had experience with.
Yes.
How did that hit you?
That was really disheartening. That was the number that actually stood out the most to me because obviously, like you said, that was me in that situation. And my first thought was, this is severely undercounted. Mind you, it's a point-in-time count, so it's just on any given night. It's not an accurate number. It's just kind of like an estimate. But I remember when I was living in my car, no one counted me. Like, I was definitely not participating in any of those things. So all I kept thinking was, this is the number that they have on paper, but I just knew that there were so many more people. And my heart kind of sunk a little bit because I knew exactly what they were going through. I knew exactly what their day was like. I know exactly what they're thinking. I know the challenges that they have. And so for me, I was just like, man, like, I hope that they have the strength to continue on.
Then came this latest research, the study Claudine worked on. The University of California, San Francisco has called it a landmark report. And I asked Ethan, why?
There are plenty of studies that are always coming out about the homelessness crisis, but I don't think anyone that has been in depth to this extent, like this particular one, they spent an entire year collecting data and doing questionnaires and doing interviews with people.
It's not just one night of counting people.
Yeah, it's not like a point in time count of one night or actually a few days where they're counting different people. It wasn't like that. They really did invest in making sure that they had the time to really sit with people and really, really understand what people were going through and what led them into homelessness. So I really, really did appreciate that.
Yeah, the methodology seemed really interesting to me. Like, they divided California into 8 regions, conducted more than 3,000 surveys, and then they picked out 365 people to have hour-long interviews with, which is a long time.
It is. First of all, there's like 3,200 people across the state. And then out of that 3,200 people, they chose 365 people to do more in-depth interviews with. They also really engaged community organizations that were already working in this space so they can get connected to people. Like I mentioned earlier, I was living in my car. No one counted me during the point in time count.
You're saying that because they had an advisory board, they had access to people, whereas they may not have had access without them.
Exactly. They found people to talk to that I'm sure they would have never have talked to had they not really been dialed in and connected to those people. So they were able to talk to people with like the LGBTQ community, for instance, or people that were in domestic violence shelters. You know, they were able to get referrals then from those people that they talked to, from other people that they knew. You know what I mean? So it really, really helped to really paint a clear picture of who exactly we're talking about when we talk about the homelessness crisis across California.
I think what you're saying is they didn't just speak to the most visible people, the most obvious people.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I wonder if you can tell me the story of one of the people the study focused on, a guy named Carlos.
His story really stood out to me because he had a work injury. He could no longer afford his apartment, so he then had to move out and then move in with other people. But then obviously when that happens, you have conflicts that arise. So then he decided, I think I'm going to move in with my family. And Carlos was lucky because he actually had family that he could move in with. But then he gets there and then realizes like, oh, I think it was a sister, she has her own life. She has her family. I don't want to be a burden to her family. I'm going to move into my car. And then he moves into his car and then he starts to get tickets because when you have never experienced homelessness before, you don't realize that there are literally signs everywhere that you don't notice when you have a place to live. That like, I can't park here overnight or there's timing. You're just not thinking about it in that way. So then he starts getting tickets and then his car becomes impounded and then he ends up in an encampment on the street. But see, most people, when they see him, they didn't see all of that prior story. They just see him in the encampment. And then all of the stereotypes and stigmas that come along with that are then piled onto him, even though they may have nothing to do with him.
Yeah, it really shows this domino effect where it's like he fell off a ladder. It's like one of those really random things to happen to you. And that like one thing trickled down and ended with him in an encampment near City Hall.
Yes, exactly. And I think that is the story that gets left out when we're talking about this and when people don't really hear on the news is that domino effect that you just said of how that happens. And it's one thing that leads to another. And before you know it, you're like, holy crap, how do I get out of this? And then it gets to the point where once you're in it, for a lot of people, and this was also in the report, they feel hopeless. They're like, I don't even have the energy anymore to deal with this. I am now depressed because I'm on waiting list and there's seemingly nowhere for me to go. So they start to feel like, well, why am I even trying? And then they give up. And then that spirals into a lot of people who may have never struggled with addiction before are now turning to alcohol and drugs to cope with the fact that they're living on the streets. And then you can see how that also adds to the downward spiral.
Yeah, I was struck by one man's story in this report. He actually started using meth because he needed to stay awake in case he had to flee his encampment because of the cops. And so it became this really interesting, like, yes, homelessness was tied in with this person's drug use, but maybe not in the way I'd anticipated. This person had actually stopped drinking because they were like, well, then I'll fall asleep and I won't be able to leave if I need to leave.
Mm-hmm. And he was fleeing the cops, but there are also people that are staying awake because they're just fearful of their safety. I've done stories about this, reported stories where people are being attacked in their encampments. Their things are being thrown in the trash. There are like vigilantes who think that they're doing a public service by like trying to scare people off.
You've talked about how one of the big myths about homelessness in California is that the people are somehow coming from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And this study really digs into that myth and debunks it. It shows that 75% of the people they talked to were still living in the same county as their last housing. They're essentially the neighbors of the housed people.
Yes, yes. 9 out of 10 participants, I think they said, lost their last housing in California. 11%, the report found, stayed within California but lived in a different census region. And then almost 90% were born in the US, and 2/3 of them were born in California. So this myth that somehow unhoused people that are on the streets are not our neighbors or are not Californians is the biggest myth of them all. These people grew up in their communities. They went to elementary school, middle school, high school in these communities. They had jobs. They were employed.
One more thing that struck me is the fact that so many of the people surveyed here thought that just a little extra cash might have prevented their homelessness for a pretty substantial period of time.
Yeah.
I think 70% of people said like $300, $500 a month of rental assistance would have worked. Even more said like a one-time payment of $5,000 or $10,000 could have done the trick.
Yeah.
These are not huge numbers. I mean, they're substantial. Like a few $1,000s is substantial. How do you think this compares to actually what's being done in a place like Los Angeles, where, as you said, there are so many things. They're trying so many things, throwing spaghetti at the wall to try to fix the homelessness problem. But then when you look at the numbers, the people who are actually homeless are like, I kind of just needed a little money.
Yeah. I actually thought that that was one of the most interesting things that was in the report. And I think the vast majority of people said that they would have preferred some type of housing voucher, which basically is a subsidy where that they can use that would cover a portion of whatever the rent that they're paying.
Well, and we have housing vouchers.
Yeah, and we have them. But because the housing market is so tight, there's really no accountability there. And it reminds me of the so many people that I've met living on the street who actually have vouchers while they're living in tents or in encampments, and they cannot use them. One, they're going up against people who don't need vouchers, for one, you know? And so if you're a landlord and you have like an apartment for rent and you have 30 people who are applying to the apartment and like 20 of them don't need a housing voucher, you're already just going to be like, I'm not going to deal with that, because why should I have to deal with that if I don't have to? A big thing is they won't even know what the vouchers are. A lot of landlords don't even know how they operate. They don't understand how they work. And so when people don't know, they rather not deal with it. And I think addressing that part of like the voucher process is going to be something that all policymakers are going to have to really like hone in and deal with, because there are a lot of vouchers out there, but a lot of people that can't use them for various reasons.
After the break, why so many in California choose to remain on the street, even when some form of shelter is offered, and how Ethan thinks the state should shake things up.
I'm so sorry, ma'am. I know you need this medicine, but it looks like it's not covered by your insurance.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had to deny that one.
Wait, who are you?
I'm your insurance company's pharmacy benefit manager. I get paid based on the price of a medicine, and I don't make as much money off this one.
No one should stand between you and your medicine. Visit phrma.org/middleman to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
The California statewide study's findings are remarkable in just how expansive they are. The survey asked participants about how they became homeless, of course, but it also sought detailed answers to questions about race, age, family structure, children, gender, work, even pregnancy. One of the most striking facts from this mountain of data is that California's homeless population is aging. The median age of the 171,000 people experiencing homelessness in the state is now 47. And lots of people on the street seem to have given up on finding housing at all. I asked Ethan if he was surprised by that finding.
I was not surprised. I have met many people during my time reporting on homelessness that have basically told me the same thing. Like, even when I go out to tell them, like, oh, they're going to be, they're supposed to be this or they're supposed to be doing that. They're like, yeah, whatever. I've been out here long enough to know, like, this is all talk. Like, and especially when we talk about money, They hear about this. They're like, they're spending billions of dollars, to fix this problem. I don't see how this is helping me. Where can I go now? Is someone putting me in an apartment now? And they've been told so many things and given so many promises. Even when I was talking to the mayor about the outreach that they're doing, they still haven't gotten to the point where they're even giving people things in writing. Like they say, like, if you come with me, this is what we're going to guarantee you. It's always like, leave the tent, leave the life that you've built here where there's some semblance of stability and you've formed community with people, and come with me to this mysterious hotel or motel somewhere, and eventually we'll connect you to permanent housing. And a lot of people don't get that connection.
And there's no promise of how long the housing lasts, I guess.
Exactly, because there's not enough permanent places for people to go. And then I've heard them complain about like the rules that come along with that, whereas in their tent, they, obviously don't have rules and they don't have all of these different things to deal with. And so it does get to the point where they do feel like, why should I even care about this anymore? Why do I need to continue?
One guy who was living in a tent talked about the rules you're talking about of living in a hotel room, how I think he was saying you could only leave between 1 and 3 or something like that. You had to stay in the building. And for him, he was like, why would I stay? I felt like a prisoner. This seems fixable, though, by asking people what they need.
Yeah. I think what most people want and what they need is to be treated like human beings and not like prisoners. And I think that there's this misconception that if you're unhoused or you're on the streets, that one, you should take whatever someone gives you and be happy with it. That's the first thing that we tell people. Like, they should be grateful, to be in this place, because at least they're not on the streets in my way or in my line of view. And I don't think that that's fair. The only, I guess, quote unquote, crime that most unhoused people have committed is poverty.
Yeah. I feel like this report is coming out at such an interesting time. I've noticed homelessness, what causes it and how it could be fixed, is emerging as this right-wing talking point, especially the idea that giving people housing before addressing whatever other needs they have, mental health challenges, addiction, whatever, is somehow bad or wrong.
Homelessness in Portland is exploding. So what'd the city do? Did they round up the mentally ill and get them treatment? Did they crack down on drugs? Nope. Portland spent $50 million to build safe rest villages for the homeless.
Have you noticed that too?
I have, and I don't understand it. I kind of feel like everyone needs to be in a house, and having secure, stable housing is the path that leads to you being able to start getting treatment if you are dealing with a substance use issue or you do have mental health issues. I think the report found that it said 44% of all the people that they surveyed were looking for employment. But if you don't have a place to live and to do basic things like wash your clothes, that's going to make it harder for you to get a job or even feel comfortable having a job. So housing really is the kind of foundational baseline for a lot of these other things to work.
Yeah. I mean, the more that I've noticed this housing first idea getting attacked by the right, the more weird it seems to me. Because, first of all, housing first was really supercharged under the George W. Bush administration, which is a Republican administration, obviously. But now you see people like, there's this tech mogul, John Lonsdale, who's called housing first Marxist, like an attempt to blame homelessness on capitalism, sort of acknowledging like, oh, it makes a logical sense to give people housing first, but you need to address all these other things before you do that. It's just a very weird sort of through the looking glass thing to be watching happen.
Yeah, I don't get it. And it's weird to me because even if you are like a capitalist and all you care about is money, I'm like, common sense says that like the more people that are in stable housing and can go about their day and go get jobs can contribute to the economy. That kind of helps everyone's bottom line. So even if you're in it for solely like capitalistic purposes and wanting enough people to be in a place where they can contribute to the economy and pay taxes and do all this and that, it seems like you would definitely be an advocate for people being in a house. I don't think people really think about how important it is, like just having access to a restroom. You know what I mean? Like having access to a restroom. My life revolved around the restroom when I lived in my car. Like I literally did not eat after a certain time of the day because I was like, there's nowhere for me to go once I go to sleep at night in my car. And my life for an entire year revolved around that. And I remember getting back into my own place and thinking like, oh my God, I can use the bathroom whenever I need. I can take a shower whenever I need. Like, I don't have to my life doesn't have to revolve around this time schedule anymore. And I think even those very, very simple things people don't really think about because they're just so intrinsic to their day-to-day life. It's not something that they have to think about. But when you don't have a house, it's all you think about.
You know, the last time I interviewed you, which was a little more than a year ago, you were talking about how California needed to reframe its homelessness problem as a natural disaster.
Yeah.
And I was just reading an interview with Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles. And at the very end, she compared the homelessness crisis to an earthquake. It made me wonder if you think public officials in California are moving in the right direction, at least rhetorically.
I will say this. She, on her first day in office, the Mayor Bass, she did declare homelessness a state of emergency. So that really did free up a lot of the bureaucratic hurdles that a lot of people were dealing with. It streamlines a lot of the processes that they have to go through. She's been very, I think, on top of that aspect. And I think framing it as a disaster and as an emergency is definitely helpful. But if I can just go back to that report, we also need to really now dig deeper into like this very general talk of like, the first thing that we decided is that we need to increase access to affordable housing to extremely low income people. How? By producing more housing and rental subsidies and supporting their use on the rental market. And it's like, okay, yeah, like we have a lot of reports to say that. I think we're all in agreement that that needs to happen. But how do we really actually make that happen in reality? Because like I said, a lot of the people that are using the subsidies are trying to use the subsidies, I should say, they are meeting roadblocks. Who are those roadblocks? Who are those people? What are we doing to address that?
It sounds like you're saying this report does a really good job of articulating the problem, but maybe not as great of a job at articulating the solution.
Well, they had solutions. They had recommendations. But like I say, I always feel like when I was reading it, I felt like, okay, great, I know this. But maybe I'm speaking from someone that reports on homelessness. It's like, obviously, I know that, yes, we need, more affordable housing for low income people. But we have stuff in place now, like the vouchers that can be used, but people are not able to use them for various reasons. Like it reminded me of that woman that I wrote about, Sarah Faye, who worked in the homelessness space and did not have a place to live. She was living between her grandmother's garage, motels, and her car. And she said she had tried to use a voucher for 3 years. And I'm thinking, if this woman who works in this space and she's actually responsible for connecting other young people to homelessness services, if she can't find a place and can't find a house and she has a college degree, what are we really asking and expecting of people who do not have even what she had? And those are the things that I want to see called out or addressed. And when we're talking about solutions, it does sometimes feel very generic and very like, okay, like, yes, increase access to low, barrier mental health services. And it's like, okay, great. But last summer, the governor vetoed a bill to set up drug overdose prevention programs in some California cities.
It's interesting. It sounds like you're saying the solutions here are like frustratingly simple, like so simple. Like give someone empathy, give someone a place to live, all these sorts of things. But there are all these barriers to getting there.
Yeah. And like I said, I really appreciate the report. I want to be very clear. I think the report is amazing. And as someone, I looked at it for leads for stories, I felt like it did a really good job of like laying out this picture. And my takeaway is I'm hoping that because they did such a good job of laying this out, that we can actually really now start to get into the part of the conversation where they have listed these suggestions for making things better. But now we should really be digging into the weeds of the barriers that are preventing us from doing that and start calling that out. That's what I would like to see happen going forward.
Ethan, I'm super grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Ethan Ward is the founder of HEATDRAWN Media and the host of Reputation. It's a podcast. Go check it out wherever you listen. Claudine Sipili, who you heard from at the top of the show, co-led UCSF's Lived Experience Advisory Board for the California Statewide Study of People Experiencing Homelessness. And that's the show. If you're a fan of what we're doing here at What Next, the best way to support us is to join Slate Plus. Go on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. What Next is produced by Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, Paige Osborne, and Madeline Ducharme. We are led by Alicia Montgomery with a little boost from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you back here tomorrow.